Thank you everyone for joining us today at the Wovensouls Art Talks. The talk begins with a pre-recorded interview with our collector guest, followed by a virtual tour of his home. At the end of the tour, there will be a question and answer session. Now, today we begin this series of Wovensouls interviews with our first guest collector, whom I have known for 5 years. Exactly 5 years ago, on October 26th, 2017, Peter, you placed your first order with Wovensouls. I didn't know that till this afternoon. Yeah, I was just looking at our history and realized that it was exactly on this day. So what a remarkable coincidence that is, that we have you here with us today. So allow me to introduce Mr. Burleigh's record, his career, yeah? He was an ambassador of the United States 3 times and was also 3 times Deputy Assistant Secretary of State during his 33-year career in the Foreign Service. He specialized in South Asia and Persian Gulf affairs during most of the time. His final assignment was as ambassador and deputy permanent representative to the United Nations for the United States in New York. He has served as the US ambassador to Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and to India. His journey around the globe began in the 60s as a Fulbright scholar, which took him to Nepal for a year. Today, Ambassador Burleigh has kindly agreed to share his journey of art collecting with us. Thank you very much, Peter, for joining us. Would you like to say a few words and before we begin your video?
Sure, thanks, Jaina. So I'm delighted to be the first victim, guinea pig, of this new series. And I'm looking forward to participating and viewing all of them, actually. I know they'll be different. They'll all be different, I assume, with different aspects and procedures, perhaps, about how you go about making the presentation. But I have to confess to the viewers that the video they're going to see is the one that I did. That is the video of my apartment here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where I live now, is the first video I've ever made in my life. So please excuse the amateurish and sort of ham-handed approach, but I did my best anyway. And I think I hope it will serve our purposes. So yes, and I'm also just briefly, Jaina, I'm also delighted to hear that our relationship is exactly 5 years. I'm astonished that there's that coincidence. Yeah. Maybe Lakshmi had something to do with it. Do you think?
Yeah, how wonderful! Yeah. Yes.
Yes. Right. Anyway, I'm looking forward to this presentation and most especially to the Q&A session at the end, because I'd like, if I can be helpful or provide any additional sort of information, I'd be happy to do that when we get to towards the end of the presentation. So back to you, Jaina.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you for the lovely words. So let's begin with the interview and you sharing your journey of art collecting in your own words. It's a pre-recorded interview that we did a few days ago. So
hello, Jaina, and hello everyone else who may be watching. As you suggested, Jaina, I think looking back at my time both as a diplomat and as a collector of various pieces of art and folk and classical art, both. I think the truth is, after I graduated from college, I immediately joined the Peace Corps, the American Peace Corps, and was sent to Nepal. And this is in 1963. And I lived in a village in Nepal for 2 years, right on the India-Nepal border in the southern part of Nepal. And that was my introduction both to a very unusual for me, for an American young person, introduction to a culture that was very different, radically different from what I had grown up with. And we were thrown into a situation where you had to learn the language because in our particular town, nobody spoke English at all. So we had to learn the language because in our particular town, nobody spoke English at all. So we learned a kind of combination of Nepali language and what they call Dehati Hindi, the rural Hindi. So it was kind of a mix like that, but I was a teacher of English and science. And the science I taught in that Hindi, believe it or not. I had to learn a lot about the local culture. And so that threw me into this discussion, learning about South Asia. I started reading a lot more than I had ever about Indian history and culture and its implications in the surrounding countries. For the next 25 years, was in and out, basically, of the region, let's say, and a lot of assignments in Washington. So I was about half of my 33 years in the region of India. Both that initial Peace Corps experience and then when I went back to Nepal on the Fulbright scholarship, I was in Kathmandu Valley. And that too that's a very different cultural area compared to the Terai area where I was in the southern part of Nepal. And that's where I got introduced to Himalayan Buddhism and the combination of Hinduism and Buddhism that's prevails in the Kathmandu Valley. In fact, if you ask people there, are you a Hindu or are you a Buddhist? It doesn't really make sense to them because they're both, and they have melded the pantheon of deities together, and you find, there are various emphases. Anyway, by that time, I had, as a Peace Corps volunteer, I had very little money, so there was no question about buying anything, but I did start collecting some folk art. Children's toys and pottery that was made in the village that kids played with and things like that. But it was in Nepal, in Kathmandu, that I got introduced to the really great culture of Nepal. And it was, that's both in terms of interest in the architecture, the very unusual architecture of temples and the medieval temples and palaces of the three small kingdoms that used to be in the Kathmandu Valley. And that's what I was studying when on the Fulbright grant. I was studying temple inscriptions to study the history of this is the 15th, 16th, 17th century history of Kathmandu, which was not well known and not written about even in Nepali, let alone any international language. So that was another deep learning curve. And also an introduction to the culture, the unusual culture there. After that, I had the experience in Calcutta, which was yet another very distinct and interesting cultural region, let's say. And I have always I was encouraged professionally, but I also tried personally to learn the language wherever I was, to at least to do some bare minimal. And then for professional purposes, I would sometimes make speeches or have radio or television interviews. And I had probably terrible pronunciation most of the time, but people could basically understand me and understand the environment when you're out. And because otherwise, if you're dependent as a visitor and certainly as a diplomat, if you're dependent on a translator, you get a filter that may or may not give you the full accurate, really with the nuances that you need to understand about what people are really saying and thinking. And in Calcutta, while in Calcutta, I was able to, I by that time had a government salary, so I had some money that I could spend. And from the US consulate in Calcutta, we covered Bihar, Bengal, Orissa, Assam, and the northeastern small states, tribal states. So by covering we went on trips regularly. We met with the political leaders and government leaders, civil society leaders, and so on in that area. So I got the exposure to a lot of yet again, different sort of provincial, let's say, cultures and languages, but also art, textiles, carvings, stone and wood, all of that is you're simply, you find yourself simply inundated with so many interesting and beautiful things to learn about, basically, and enjoy. So, yes, and enjoy is really key to all of that. From the fun of and the excitement of travel and going to new places, I think it also gives you the opportunity to dig into both also the languages I've mentioned, but also food, which is a big interest of mine. You can probably tell I consume too much of it, but it has become a hobby of mine now in Indian cooking. And I've taken so from then on, I had established a pattern of always being interested to see what was being created in terms of the arts, both contemporaneously and also in the history of the place wherever I was. And I started buying and collecting some items. And in recent years, in particular, textiles in India have interested me. And in fact, that's how you and I met, is through the textiles.
Yes, absolutely. And thanks to the textiles that we bought. Yeah.
Right.
So you focus basically on textiles, and what other categories?
I have a fairly substantial number of wooden images, both from Nepal and from India. And then, as you'll see in the video later, I also have some Sri Lankan provincial Buddhist paintings of the Buddha, and one huge one in my living room, which I found on the side of the road driving to Kandy from Colombo. Colombo's the capital and Kandy's the next largest city. And I was just driving on the road and I saw some stacks of what is this Buddhist image in my living room now. And it turns out that the local community had decided that they didn't like their old temple, and they had built an ugly, what I call sort of Soviet style, cement building, rather than they have a very graceful traditional architecture in Sri Lanka. Like most places, they have their own unique style, and some of that is still existent, but not much. And in this particular province, and they were selling that Buddha for firewood, believe it or not. So I bought it for firewood. I mean, by the weight, that's how it came in planks. It was the ceiling of a Buddhist temple, the entire ceiling. So I'm talking about really small, but also, and there would have been something in front of them too, probably a metal or wooden image of the Buddha. But also they were encouraged to look up at, and he was watching. The idea was he was always watching, and people would go to those kinds of small temples in order to, as is the case with most religions, there were requests for favors, let's say, from the deity. Yes. The other piece that's important that you'll see in the video is a very large wooden mask of Bhairav, and it's from Nepal, and it's probably 16th or early 17th century. It had been painted. Most of the paint is gone from it, but Nepal was and is very famous for the incredible woodworking it did, the carving of many things. And that Bhairav mask, I tried to make sure in the video that you could see through the mouth there was a hole. Okay. And in the Indra festival, Indra Jatra, they call it in Nepal, once a year, that would be owned by a family, not from a temple or anything, but a well-to-do family, and they would put that mask up on their balcony, let's say, and put a bamboo straw through that mouth and pour into it a homemade alcohol, homemade liquor, below on the street, so it would flow through the mouth of that mask, they call it, down to the people on the street who are dancing and singing and moving through the whole old city of Kathmandu. And so the dancers who had been drinking a lot would go under the statue and get more alcohol. And once a night, that family would put a tiny fish in the alcohol. And if you were the lucky one dancing down below and you got the alcohol and the fish, it meant that you and your immediate family would go straight to heaven when you died. So there was huge tussles, at the street level. Anyway, it's a beautiful, if you look carefully at it, it's a very beautiful carving. And it's a skill that a few people still have. And so anyway, so that's basically my story. Yeah.
What is it that you look for, the items that you collect?
Well, for example, what you're wearing are the kinds of colors that I find extremely attractive, especially oranges and yellows and reds and different shades of those. And so you'll see in some of the hangings in my apartment that these fool curries from Punjab that I've collected several of are almost all those tones. And because for me, the attraction is, the first attraction is the color and how the colors benefit each other and sort of play off of each other and when there are multicolored ones. And after that, of course, the individual stitching and the detailed work and thinking about the history of the young girls who are making these things, before their marriage with their grandmother and all of that, of course, makes a wonderful story. And it's all true. I mean, that was the rural Punjabi experience in all the region, as you very well know. And so anyone, frankly, who's watching and doesn't know anything about fool curries or is not interested, you need to find out about them. You can find out at Wovensouls, some of the most beautiful ones. This is not a paid advertisement, by the way. But I'm serious, for the variety and so on of these incredible rural traditional textiles and stitching that is done still today, though there are also some manufactured ones, I think, they don't have anything like the
old ones,
personality, let's say, of the traditional one. So that's my color story. It started in my 20s, and I'm now 80, and it continues to be the first thing that appeals to me. One other thing is music.
Oh, okay.
Music of the area, and that too has incredible variety in the different provinces of India and different styles of music. And often I found early on that the musicians often wore classical clothing of that region. So if you wanted to know what both women and men wore traditionally, you could, if you went to a concert, but the first ones I went to were serious ones, were in Tamil Nadu, what is now Chennai. They have a huge festival every year of Carnatic music. And I remember for the first time seeing these people in hand-woven, hand homespun, but beautiful, gorgeous textiles.
So what makes you acquire these pieces? What are the key motivations to, get them? Is it just what we all feel, the rest of us desire to make it your own? Is that it? Or is there something deeper besides?
Well, I've got two motivations. When I was younger, I think that desire to make it my own, to have it around me, something that really hit home and seemed worth expensive, whether it was also something I would want to live with. And so I was always trying to imagine where I would put or how I would display what I was getting.
So what would be your advice to collectors? How do you discern between something, how will you be able to make out whether something is genuinely old or just a reproduction?
I would be, off the top of my head, I would say to initially be cautious and see as much as you can and read and Now there's so much available in books and in videos and so on of the real thing, and expert people to either meet if you can, or go to lectures about it, go to the classic books. And there are many really good, really fine books with wonderful illustrations now. When in the 60s, there were very few that had any color of anything in those kinds of academic and books that were available. There were certainly some, but they were by and large inferior in terms of reproduction of the full, beauty of whatever you were looking at. Now the reproductions are fantastic. The photography is, as good as it gets in the world, and so you can learn a lot that way. And also just go to see as many different places, and if you focus on any particular kind of art, then immerse yourself in it before you start buying anything or collecting anything. That would be my advice. Unless you fall totally in love, if you walk into some place and you just can't bear the thought of not living with that, you better snap it up and hope and learn how to bargain. If you're in that region of the world, yes, you need to bargain also. And by bargaining, I mean really be tough-minded. It's hard for non-Asians, by and large, to be effective bargainers. But you have to be prepared to pretend to walk away, for example, if the price is not right.
I start at 20% of the listed price. So if he's saying 100, I start with 20, and we settle at around 30.
Yes. Well, that's much better than I've done, frankly. But yes, exactly.
A lot of the time it works. Sometimes it doesn't, but you try.
Yes, right. Yes. Well, it and sometimes you just can't have everything you want. You have to live with that reality too.
Have you had any regrets where you had to leave a piece behind, or you still think about something that you let go and you didn't get?
Well, what I've done recently is I bought some Nepalese, actually one what turned out to be an important wooden polychrome painted but wooden statue that is probably 16th century, it's thought to be. And there were two on offer by a dealer in New York in the early 80s, this was. And without thinking about it, I bought one without thinking about how the statue would have gotten there and what its antecedents would be. And only recently I've come to know that, and I've lived with that statue since the 80s, for 40 years. But I've, in Nepal, like in Cambodia and other places in Asia, there's been a lot of work done recently about stolen items, basically, particularly bronzes and wooden statues in Nepal's case. And so I learned that this probably was, even though the second one that I didn't buy is now in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, our major museum in the United States, bought this other one, also presumably stolen. So I've recently returned it to Nepal. And at my instigation, not because of any approach from the Nepali side or whatever, but just feeling that it was inappropriate to have it outside of the country. And there's enough interest now in Nepal to protect these things. In the past, I've also had some bad experiences there in the 70s where I had some palm leaf manuscripts that I had used in my Fulbright studies, which were land grants, but which were important because they had the name of the king who was ruling on that particular day, and you were able to put together a chronology of the kings as a result. So I had a collection of them. I gave them to I won't detail who I gave them to, but I gave them to the government of Nepal. And about 10 years later, I've been in and out of Nepal most of my adult life, and I went back to the archaeological museum and said, I'd like to see my palms manuscripts. Not there. They'd been resold. Yeah. Somehow. I mean, I don't know who did it and so on, but they were lost. So that too, given the timing, now I think that would not be possible. But it was, people had low salaries that were working in these archaeological departments, and somebody comes in and offers a lot of money. So that's a regret. I wish I'd kept them longer and then given them now, so that they would be protected and so on.
Yeah.
But there's a huge, that whole question of the looted or stolen artifacts all over India, Nepal, what is now Bangladesh, what is now Pakistan and Afghanistan. All of that is a tremendous problem, and museums and private collectors all over the world, certainly here in the US, have these items that they didn't ask about provenance, or they were given something fake, that somebody said that this was a private owner, a family owned this and needed the money, so they sold it legally. I mean, it was their property and they sold it legally to a dealer someplace. And so that's a real, it's worldwide. All over Africa now, you'll see all these stories about the British returning these incredible bronzes to Mali and other places, where they had these, just amazing local cultures and capacities. So that's really the only regret that I was foolish enough to do that. Although to buy something in New York that shouldn't have been there, basically, let's say.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, now it's back in Nepal. It is safely back in Nepal. It's in the National Museum.
Okay. Oh, wow. That's great. Yeah. You do what you can with the best knowledge that you have at that time.
At the time. Yeah, exactly. And we know so much more now, frankly, about, and if you're talking about authentic, important pieces.
Okay. All right. So, Peter, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your experiences with all your artifacts.
Sure.
Shall I go ahead and share your tour of your home? Yeah, I think everyone's eager to look at all your collection.
So this is the entrance to my apartment. That was Indra with his arms out, and he's being cursed by Shiva, and in penance for 1,000 years or 10,000 years or something, with his arms out like that. Indra had been approaching Parvati, and Shiva was furious, and so cursed Indra. This is the Bhairav mask from Nepal that I mentioned during our conversation, and you see the hole in the lip there. That's where the bamboo straw, or pipe as they would call it, is put during the Indra Jatra festival. This is the wood by the side of the road. This is the piece from Sri Lanka. You'll notice it's done in separate boards that are hung together. And this is the one that was a ceiling of a provincial Buddhist chapel, probably 18th, maybe 19th century, but being discarded by the local community.
So this is a very satisfying rescue, I'm sure, for you.
Yes, yeah. I'm happy to have done it, and if appropriate, it'll go back to Sri Lanka if there's a good place to put it there in one of the museums.
Wonderful.
This is a young monk, obviously, a Burmese wooden statue, which I bought for less than $50 in the late 60s in Bangkok.
Wow.
These are Rajasthani windows. This is a style that is unique to Bikaner. They have a stylized cloud painting that you see in the palaces in Bikaner and around, and that you don't get in other Rajasthani cities. This is one half of a pair of doors of a Buddhist monastery someplace. These are Buddhist tales. And then going down this corridor, I have a lot of textiles on the wall. This is a piece that Jaina will know more about.
This one would be from Gujarat.
We're starting to see some of the fulkaris that we talked about. But on the floor, you'll see I have a collection of Tibetan carpet. This is the parrot fulkari. Yes. You'll see the oranges and reds and yellows that I was talking about, and the colors that appeal to me. This is a kind of funny, I don't know what it is. It's sort of a policeman, and it's not very old. You'll see he has a watch on and so on.
Oh, he has a watch on.
Yes. It's just a piece of folk art that drew my attention. This is Durga's lion that she would ride on. This is from Sri Lanka. Oh. You'll see in very bad condition, also being thrown away. Okay. Terracotta piece. But I think probably all of you know that certainly with traditional Hindus, but also with traditional, at least Himalayan Buddhists, if there's a flaw in the deity at all, something's broken or doesn't work properly, isn't proper according to the requirements of whatever it's supposed to look like when it's a complete form, they don't use it anymore. It loses its spiritual force. Here's more fulkaris. All around this room, you'll see these wonderful hand-stitched Punjabi textiles. For those of you who haven't seen them in person and up front, that's all tiny, tiny little stitches and it must take these young girls forever to produce one. They would be part of a dowry that the young woman would bring as part of her dowry when she moves into her husband's home. You see some still, even now, you see some especially elderly Punjabi women, if you go to a wedding, that they would be wrapped in textiles like this, all of which would be handed down within their families over some generations, and highly valued by them as a family treasure. So that's a yali from either from Tamil Nadu or Kerala. It's a protective deity.
This one is really attractive, with these colors and everything.
Well, I think so too, but most of my friends think I'm crazy, but anyway. And And these are some paintings. This is would have been part of a manuscript in Nepal, and that's a Jain manuscript from Gujarat. Yes, in all of these, the textiles are astonishing, and the detailed representation of what people wear, what the colors were, what the styles of draping were, and so on. All of these are reflected in this kind of early manuscript.
There's one on Sotheby's at the moment, $12,000 for one folio. That's the starting estimate, low estimate. So I just saw it last week.
Oh my goodness.
And I was taken aback, you know. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now these are bags. Jaina will be able to tell you more. I was told they were dowry bags, but also I tried to get close on this so you can see the detail of the hand stitching. And I was also told with regard to those bags that Muslims in the area use them for wrapping the Quran. That's another fulkari, another example.
This one is stunning.
This may have come from you, Jaina. I don't remember now exactly.
I don't think so. No, that didn't come from me. I have another one like this, but that's not mine.
Oh, yeah.
I find it stunning. And, you know, you've given me an idea of how I can use it in my own home.
These are Tibetan chests. And one thing I'd like to point out, I was talking about color earlier, is there's a continuity of colors throughout the whole region. It doesn't matter what the local culture tends to be, but they tend to be have these same oranges, reds, and so on, natural colors. I'm sorry about the light on this. This is a beautiful embroidery piece of the cotton textile is very old, the base textile, and then there's been an embroidery done on top of it. But the textile itself is several hundred years old.
Okay, so we're done with the video. I think, Peter, what I could gather from, let me stop sharing the screen. So what I gathered from this is that the pieces that you have collected or the ones that appeal to you were very much steeped in culture, because there's a cultural story to almost every piece that you have with you, right? The color and the culture.
Yes, well, I like.
These are the two things.
Yes, and I like to learn the history, or you know, what the function was or is, and you know, what its history is and why it's unusual, if it is. And even with those contemporary textiles, the ones that were hanging on the door, the shawls.
Yes.
Those are all synthetic fabrics, almost all of them. So they're not the traditional hand spun, homespun kind of textiles, although some of them are that too. But the tradition continues of making these beautiful, especially shawls for women. And it's one of the reasons that Indian women, by and large, Indian and the women of the region, let's say, have these gorgeous shawls that they can wrap themselves up in. And some of them are very easy to find and easy to get and not very expensive. Some are wildly expensive, you know, tens of thousands of dollars, for example.
Lovely. So now, Peter, shall I throw the forum open to our guests and we'll see if they have any questions?
Sure.
Peter, I'll begin with a question from Suzanne Spencer from Kalamazoo. I'll just read out what she had. She couldn't attend, but she said to ask you this. She was concerned about protecting your treasures from Mother Nature in Florida. How do you manage to do that on a daily basis? How do you store and preserve your pieces?
Well, it's a very good question. Because it's Florida, my apartment is air conditioned and I keep it at a certain temperature, particularly to protect the wood in the wood pieces here. They've traveled around the world multiple times now with me, and I have taken some of them with me when I go to various postings, and then they're back in.
Yeah, Peter, we can't hear you. I think you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you. Yes, yes.
I don't know why I got stuck in mute. I thought that was you, Jaina, telling me to be quiet. I've talked too much already.
Yeah. Okay. So you were saying?
I was saying, I was talking about, moving things around, in particular wood pieces, because the wood expands and contracts. And if they're painted, whatever it is, the paint, it will flake eventually. So here in Florida, where I've been for 20 years now, 22 years, I keep it at a certain temperature, which seems to work with these items. With regard to the wooden statue that I sent back to Nepal, that was one of the things I was worried about, how it would. I shipped it to Washington and to the Embassy of Nepal, and they were UPS, by the way, has a wonderful program where they are pro bono shipping these items back to the original country on UPS. They do the international shipping, which could be very expensive. But anyway, they also have a way of keeping the climate and in particular humidity under control when they do the shipping.
Okay, super. So that's good. I think Suzanne will be happy to hear that. She collects a lot of textiles, and I think she worries about preserving,
yes.
For maybe next century or whatever. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just say that my impression with textiles is that if you keep the humidity, especially the humidity, regularly the same, even keel, not move it up and down a lot, with a lot of humidity, even though these came from, assuming her textiles are also from South Asia, that it came from places where the humidity would be very high or very low in winter and so on. But now with old pieces of textile, you need to be very careful about the humidity in particular.
Yeah.
Temperature too, but humidity more important if you can control that.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see. What else? Everyone's very happy. Fascinating event. Anish Das asks if you collect any kanthas. Did you buy any kanthas when you were in Calcutta and Bengal?
I have to confess I didn't. And Mr. Das, no doubt, it sounds like a Bengali name.
Yes.
So I'll apologize. I think they're beautiful and love them, but for some reason I never got into collecting them.
You're going to Calcutta soon. You can look for them there.
Yes. Yeah. I'll be there in February, but will there be any really wonderful ones available? I don't know. Yeah. Maybe Mr. Das has some.
Yeah, I think he's not in Calcutta. He's outside.
Okay.
Okay, and Peter, you were one of the first people, D.K. Myers says this, Peter was one of the first people to collect Tibetan carpets in the 1970s. What drew you to them, and are you still collecting more?
I missed more of what?
Tibetan carpets.
Oh, yes. Well, she is a world expert on Tibetan carpets, and the answer is no, I haven't in recent years, though I basically don't have much more floor space. I have nothing, Diane, I have nothing in storage. I made if things didn't fit in my apartment, I gave them away or sold them or did something. Okay. So with regard to Tibetan carpets, they are by far my favorite carpets. And as you could have seen, I didn't focus on them, but they're all over, including the ones that Diana borrowed for the Textile Museum exhibition that she put together years ago in Washington, D.C. in the Textile Museum. That pair on the wall that I pointed out as we were too rapidly going down the corridor is the ones she borrowed. And she taught me a lot about what they were and where they had come from and what their age was and so on. And anyone who hasn't seen her books on both on Tibetan things and on Bhutan should buy them.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Himanish asks, what is the textile behind you, Peter?
It's from Sri Lanka. It's a batik that I would have gotten around 1968 or 69, done by a man named Lucky Senanayaka, who was at that point one of the premier 2 or 3 famous Sri Lankan batik makers, who did a lot of work for displays in hotels for design, interior decoration, let's say, of hotels. And this is supposed to be a, if I don't know if you can, you can see some of it anyway. It's a young warrior in the jungle scene with a sword in his hand, and it's meant to be a Veda, who are the indigenous people of Sri Lanka. And it would have been, he and some of his colleagues had a big exhibition sale in 1968 or so, when I was posted in Colombo, and that's how I met it. He's no longer here, but he has done amazing work.
Okay. Peter, one more question. Now, Martin has 2 questions. Do you make any offerings to any of your pieces? Like the Bhairav maybe, or the Buddha, I guess. I don't know.
Not in a deeply serious way, I'll confess. But with the lamps, with the oil lamps, I sometimes light them. I mean, I put oil in them and light them for my own pleasure, or if people are coming for dinner or something, I sometimes do that.
Okay, and there's one more question from Martin. He says, have you had any supernatural experiences in relation to the pieces in your collection?
Not that I was aware of, let's say.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question, though. So it's actually a very interesting question.
Yeah.
As far as I know, no. It's not supernatural, but what I do get is enormous pleasure and a feeling of relaxation and of sort of generalized pleasure. I would call it relaxation and pleasure, being around these things, these beautiful things.
Okay. Christina, done all right?
I think Sunaina is.
Sunaina?
Message, Mr. Burleigh, thank you very much. It was very interesting to see your collection. And I wanted to know, where did you collect your pulkaris from?
Mostly, let's see. I got a couple, at least from Jaina.
Okay.
I bought some in Delhi, with dealers in Delhi. There are some
Dealers.
Dealers who, I was particularly interested in the SWAT pulkaris, the ones from the former, provincial area of SWAT, northern Pakistan. And they have a special style, and well, as you well know, and unusual colors, and especially a lot of reds and magentas and so on. So word was, there were 2 or 3 dealers in Delhi that I used to see when I was living there.
I had another question. Was the last image of a pulkari Senchi?
Yes.
Last one, was it the red on the red background, embroidery on the red background?
Yes, it's on the red background. Yes.
That was also a pulkari?
Yes.
No, the very last one, you mean the one we've been using as the cover photo for all. Yes, that is a Senchi. That's a temple hanging, actually, because it has Hanuman and
pulkari?
Yes, it's a temple hanging that Peter, it was also the opening shot of Peter's video, where he's hung it behind the Indra. It's that full.
That's right.
Yeah. So
that came from Jaina also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very beautiful.
It's a unique piece. I had not seen anything like it, frankly.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what you're asking, because it's much smaller than the normal pulkari, and done in a different way. All of the deities in it, the ones that are religious deities, are all done in different colors. thread. So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't seen one like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
So I think we have we've addressed all the questions. So thank you very much, Peter. Peter, you'd like to say a few words before we end?
No, I'm fine. Thank you so much for organizing this, Jaina, and thank you all for watching.
It's a pleasure.
It's been fun and a pleasure for me. So
everybody's saying what a wonderful time they've had. So I think I'll send that to you. It'll be fun to read.
Very kind of you. Thank you.
Thank you for attending the Wovensouls Art Talk. If you've enjoyed this and would like to attend the ones we've planned in the future, do stay in touch by going to wovensouls.com and registering or signing up. Make sure you subscribe to the newsletter because that's where you'll receive your invitation to the next talk. Thank you and see you around on wovensouls.com. Bye-bye.